For lesson 3, we're going to look at solving some word problems using our quadratic equations. The length of the shortest side of a right triangle is 8, and the lengths of the other two sides are represented by consecutive odd integers. Write an equation that can be used to find the lengths of the other sides and solve our equation. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make a right triangle. So when we do that, we end up with our shortest side is 8, so we'll make that our shortest side. And then it says the other two sides are consecutive odd integers. So we always make our first side x, and then our next side, which in this case is going to be our hypotenuse. Anytime it's consecutive odd or even, we're x and x plus 2. So in the other leg will be x, and then x plus 2 will go on our hypotenuse. So if we remember our Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, c's got to be the hypotenuse. The other two can fill in wherever we need. And the key is we want to make sure we wrap that x plus 2 squared in parentheses. So if we look at the left-hand side, the x squared just stays for now. The 8 squared becomes 64. And then what we want to do is we want to remember that x plus 2 squared is really x plus 2 times x plus 2. Which means we want to multiply it out in our boxes. So x plus 2, we get x squared, 2x, 2x, and 4. And then we will add our like terms together. So when we get that, we get x squared plus 4x plus 4. Now, normally we'd want to set this equal to 0 when we see our x squareds and x is in the same problem. But the thing is, when we subtract our x squared on both sides, they cancel. And then we end up with 64 equals 4x plus 4. And this actually becomes a linear equation. So we'll subtract our 4 on both sides. 60 equals 4x. We'll divide by 4 on both sides, and x is 15. So there's our next equation. So we end up with our answers as 15 and 17 for our sides of our triangle. For the next one, the length of a rectangle is 4 less than twice the width. The area of the rectangle is 70. Find the dimensions of the rectangle algebraically and explain why one of the solutions is not viable. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make a rectangle. And it says the rectangle is 4 less than twice the width. Well, we don't know what the width is, so we'll call that W. And then 4 less than twice the width is 2w minus 4. So if we think the area of our rectangle is either length times width or base times height, whichever you want to call it, right? It's the same as length times width. So we're going to have w times 2w minus 4. Now, they also told us what our area is. They told us the area of the rectangle was 70. So we'll distribute this w in here because we got to set it equal to 0. And we end up with 70 equals 2w squared minus 4w. Well, I have a w squared and a w in the same problem, so I'm going to set it equal to 0. Subtract 70, and I get 0 equals 2w squared minus 4w minus 70, because they're not like terms, so it's just going to go at the end in standard form. So it doesn't matter if our 0 is on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. We're going to look to factor. We always look for a GCF first. There isn't one. So this is a trinomial, so we know it goes into boxes. We get 2w squared and negative 70. So we need to multiply to negative 140 and add to a negative 4w. So this might take you a little bit of time to figure out what the combinations are, especially with the big number of 140. But our combination is negative 14 and positive 10. So we're going to GCF the first row. We get 2w. 2w times w is 2w squared. 2w times negative 7 is negative 14w. W times 10 is going to be 10w. And then we end up with 10 times negative 7 is negative 70. Now we actually ended up, and actually I misspoke earlier, we actually did have a GCF that you could have taken out. But I'm going to show you that when it comes to solving here, if your GCF was a number, you don't end up getting anything wrong based on it. So if we set each of these equal to 0, we're going to end up with minus 10 minus 10. We get 2w equals negative 10. Divide by 2, divide by 2, and w is negative 5. And then we're going to add 7, and we get w equals 7. So we get two answers here, negative 5 and 7, and we should know that this answer is not an option because we can't have a negative width. So then therefore, our only option for our width is going to be 7. And then our length is going to be 2 times 7 minus 4, which is going to be 10. For the third one, the product of two consecutive integers is 156. What are the integers? So it just says two consecutive. So in that case, our first is still always x, and our second is going to be x plus 1. So we're not going to skip any numbers here because it doesn't say even or odd. So x times x plus 1 equals 156. We'll distribute. We get x squared plus x equals 156. It is a x squared and x problem. So we'll have to set it equal to 0. So we subtract our 156 on both sides. So that gives us x squared plus x minus 156 equals 0. So we don't have a GCF, so we'll go right into our trinomial factoring in boxes. So x squared negative 156, multiply first by last. So we need to multiply to negative 156 and add to a positive 1. The combination that works for us there is 13x and negative 12x. So we'll GCF both of them. We get x, 13, and negative 12. So therefore we get x plus 13, x minus 12 equals 0. So we'll take both of those parentheses and set them equal to 0. We end up with x giving us a negative 13, and we get x gives us a positive 12. So we got to make sure we're answering the question here. So we're actually going to have two separate answers. The first answer is if x is 12, then we're going to have the numbers 12 and 13 as our answers. The second piece is going to be if x is negative 13, then we're going to end up with negative 13 and negative 12. So we have to make sure we do our x and x plus 1 for both scenarios. So unlike earlier when we did linear consecutive integers, we just got one answer. When we have our quadratic one, since we end up with 2, we don't reject the negative because it's not an area problem or perimeter or one of those real life problems. So we have to make sure we account for both answers, where if it's 12, it's 12 and 13. If it's negative 13, then we get negative 13 and negative 12.